It has never made sense to me that in technically advanced, economically developed countries, a lot of food is imported from overseas rather than grown at home. Traditionally, with more primitive technologies, it was advantageous to grow exotic plant-based foods in specific parts of the world, such as the tropics. Back then, we lacked the ability to control enclosed climates, so the world relied, and still does today to a great extent, on concentrating specific produce in an optimal natural climate, only then to ship that produce across the continents. Today, however, this is unnecessary. Because of globalization, we have created a world economy where you gather resources in one part of the world and ship them to a completely different region in order to be produced into something, and then shipped again to its final destination where it will be distributed to customers. This practice wastes fuel and energy, is time inefficient, and creates a huge amount of pollution and greenhouse emissions. It also creates scarcity because resources are often wasted and will only come from certain areas of the world, thus limiting their supply. Today, we have the technology to do things differently. With advanced methods of production and distribution, as well as the use of renewable and recyclable resources in a circular economy, we have the ability to transition from a centralized economy, where goods are produced halfway across the world, to a localized one, where the entire economic cycle happens at your doorstep. Greetings, and welcome back. I am your host, Adam. In my previous installment, we covered what kinds of technologies might be used in an RBE in order to generate a sustainable abundance of resources. Today, however, we're going to be taking a look into how a resource-based economy might actually be structured, keeping these previously discussed technologies in mind. Before we talk about what localization is and what it means for an economy, we first need to discuss what globalization is and how it arose. The world economy hasn't always been a global economy. In fact, for most of human history, whether it be in the form of the tribe, the kingdom, or the nation-state, economic activity has always been local, at least to some degree. What we have seen over the past century, however, is a move away from this old localism to a more globalized economic structure. This is largely in part due to it being cheaper to produce goods in poorer countries, as well as extract resources from said countries. This is a good thing. That is, if you're a wealthy individual or company and are seeking to make as much profit as possible. The downside, however, is that people's health and well-being and the well-being of natural ecosystems suffer as a result. Globalization typically involves reducing monetary cost by producing goods where there is cheap labor and then shipping those goods to richer countries where they are typically sold at high margins. This is profitable for business, but involves the exploitation of workers in poor countries and generates vast amounts of greenhouse gases from the shipping of products across the globe. In a moneyless and tradeless economy, there would be little advantage to globalization. The ecological and logistical disadvantages of concentrated production in specific areas of the world make it an inefficient and unsustainable way to conduct economic activity. So then, what alternative economic structure do RBE proponents like myself advocate for? The answer is localization. Localization is the act of taking a centralized and global economy, like the one we have now, and breaking it up into many decentralized parts located around the world. In an RBE, communities and city systems will likely be organized into an array of decentralized communities based around the concept of the circular city system, which I will cover in more detail in the future. Each community would likely have its own local economy. They will grow their own food, generate their own electricity, produce their own goods, provide their own services, and distribute this to others within the community or local area. There are many advantages to localization. Because the production of goods is in close proximity to the people demanding them, a lot of stuff can be produced on demand, reducing the amount of economic calculation needed and also reducing the demand for raw resources. Things don't need to travel nearly as far in order to get to their destination, which means people can receive goods in a timely manner without tons of greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere. What's also good about localization is that production can be tailored specifically to a community's needs. So for example, if a community demanded more bread and less bicycles, they could direct their production less so towards the production of bicycles and more towards the making of bread. A more realistic example would be the use of different types of energy depending on what environment a particular city lies within. If you're close to a coast, you might utilize more offshore wind and tidal energy, whereas in desert climates, solar might be the preferred option. One of the critiques of localization is what some people call the banana problem. This is the argument that localization cannot work because certain resources can only be found or cultivated in specific areas of the world. However, there are multiple techniques we can use to address this. When it comes to growing exotic foods such as the aforementioned bananas, we have the technology to grow them in climate-controlled environments, emulating their natural climate. This can be done either through solar heating, like in greenhouses, and also through utilizing geothermal heat from the ground. If both of these methods were used in unison, we could create a passive greenhouse environment where many exotic crops could grow. When it comes to industrial materials, we can rely on the circular economy to provide a constant supply. In order for this to be more feasible, we will need to change the way we produce things so that they are made of recyclable and commonly found materials where possible. For the actual production itself, we can either have accessible 3D printers for people in each community to use, local automated production facilities, or a combination of both. Distribution and logistics within a local economy is fairly easy. For small deliveries you could use automated drones, and for bigger logistical missions, delivery robots like we see in today's warehouses could be used. There will, however, always be some resources that different communities might not have access to. This will likely be more so the case closer to the start of a resource-based economy, but to resolve this we would have resource balancing measures in place, which I went over in my resource management systems episode. It's worth noting that part of the transition into a resource-based economy would involve making sure that each community has sufficient resources. So for instance, we would resume many mining operations until each city system has its own circular economy for those resources. Additionally, if desalination is the way we're going to produce most of our water, and the primary source is seawater, we're going to need to centralize the collection of water in coastal regions, and then build the infrastructure to transport that water across a given landmass, where it will be purified and desalinated at each city system. Nevertheless though, most economic activity can be decentralized into more local forms. Something to consider when talking about moving from a globalized economy to a localized economy is its effect on global affairs. I can foresee localization having a positive effect on a diversification of developing economies. Currently, developing regions of the world are unable to diversify their economies because wealthier areas of the world rely on them for their resources. If we allow poorer regions to develop their own localized economies, they will be able to diversify their industry and thus raise their standard of living. With a reduced reliance on foreign resources, the global north will no longer need to take resources from the global south, allowing the global south to utilize more of its natural wealth. In this way, localization can play a pivotal role in negating the global north-south divide. Additionally, a world economy consisting of many local economies is pretty much monopoly-proof. No group or individual could have monopolistic control over resources or production, and this is in part due to the very nature of a decentralized and devolved economy. Currently, we have multinational corporations that are even larger than some countries. The problem with this is that economic power is centralized, which fosters corruption and leads to vast inequality. In a resource-based economy, these types of organizations would no longer exist, because with concepts like localization and open source, monopolies on production become essentially impossible. However, for large-scale projects, such as space missions, communities might pool their resources together in order to carry out the project. Of course, if communities wish to collaborate with each other, they will need forms of transport to travel between cities. So as well as accommodating for inner-city travel, we will also need to accommodate for intercity travel as well. You could have a system where travel within a city is mainly comprised of monorails and subway systems, and reserve things like maglev trains for travel between cities. The purpose of localization is not to separate people. It is to have a decentralized economic structure where each community within a resource-based economy can have autonomy over their local economy and way of life, and to propagate sustainable and agile production of the goods people need to survive and thrive. Technologies such as vertical farming, renewable energy, and 3D printing allow us to have productivity-dense food and energy production as well as manufacturing, and circular economics will ensure that each community always has a constant supply of the resources they need. Localization is important for resource-based economies because self-sufficient communities can help bring about sustainable abundance. It's also an important part of reducing our global ecological impact. You might not have expected another video this soon. I have decided that I'm going to make more frequent uploads, with the goal of uploading a video either weekly or bi-weekly. Nevertheless, I hope you've enjoyed this installment. Next time, we're going to focus on the social and economic relations between people in a resource-based economy. For now though, this is all from me. I've been Adam, thank you very much for watching. This is me, signing off.